made him quite unique was the fact that he had been on a naval scholarship and went to Duke University. Duke University, of course, is very well known for its Institute for Paranormal Studies, and he also had told me once when I asked him about that, about whether he had had any connection with what went on at Duke, and he then recounted a period of lost time that he had experienced when he was jogging. I don't know whether that has anything to do with anything, but he did have some missing time there. When he got out of the university, because of his naval scholarship that he was on, he went into naval intelligence, which those of us who are in ufology know how very closely allied naval intelligence is to the UFO cover-up. From naval intelligence, after he served the time that was required in the Navy, he went into the CIA, worked in the CIA for a while until he decided he didn't want to be, as he called it, a spook anymore, and then went into the FBI. In the FBI, he, being the X-File man, he was in, eventually I found out, in a special division called Division 5 of the FBI, which is part of COINTELPRO, which is had been instituted, is a special level of intelligence within the FBI, within Division 5, that had been instituted by William Sullivan, who was third in command in the FBI in the 60s. All this I found out later. I knew that he had been in Division 5. Anyway, after in the interim, in the years between 1995 to 1997, and my book came out, I had not heard word one from Jordan. I had experienced more surveillances on me, very paranormal type stuff that I go into again in my book. But they seem to be more or less petering out. In January, first week in January 1997, I was sitting at my word processor and the phone rang, and I heard a voice, familiar voice, say, "Hi, this is Jordan. How are you? How are you doing?" And even though it had been almost 2 years since I had spoken with him, I didn't seem to be that surprised. I was surprised that I wasn't surprised. Almost as if I had kind of been expecting him, even though I had said to myself that I'll never hear from him again. And he said, "Well, I'm calling to tell you, to let you know that I'm no longer at the branch office in South Florida. That he said he had recently been transferred a few weeks before to Houston and was currently working at NASA as part of Division 5, doing security work for the astronauts." And I said, "Oh, that's really interesting." And he said he had a choice of either going to Puerto Rico and to work on what was going on down there for the cover-up, or Houston, and he decided that Houston would be better for his family. From that day, for the next 2 months, almost 2 months, we spoke almost every day, and he seemed to be more or less contented with his assignments. He would tell me stories of what went on at the Space Center and a little kind of anecdotes of different things. Talked about the home he was building for his family, a 5-bedroom home. And it more or less was of a personal tone. He asked me if my book had come out, and I said, "Well, it's been out." And he denied that he knew my book was out. And of course he did know. I don't see how he couldn't have known, but he denied that he did. And then he tried to move the relationship again into the same direction that he had tried to take it a few years before. And again, I was really wary because he had promised that that was over and didn't want to do it. Eventually, for my own personal reasons, I decided after 2 months that of speaking on the phone that and his not really telling me much more than I already knew. He did tell me that he had been sent in initially the first time when we met to ostensibly discuss the condominiac to neutralize me. And I said, neutralize? What do you mean neutralize? Do you mean kill? And he said, no, not kill. And then when I tried to pressure him more about it, he said, it's really better if you don't know. He said, you will know very soon. He said, very soon you and I will both be a part of something that will be happening that'll be important. At that, I really was enraged because it seemed like such a trite cliche. It's the same kind of thing that most people that are, doing in contact with any kind of ETs are told, and it certainly wasn't satisfying. I wanted facts. I wanted things of more substance. But things didn't seem to be going in that direction. Again, he was trying to take it on a personal level, and after 2 months, I just decided that I wanted to terminate that. It just was not what I felt would be appropriate. So at the end of February 1997, after almost 2 full months of being in contact on a daily basis, I said goodbye to Jordan once again. In July, the following July, so that's from February to July, I had not heard from him. Continued to do what I normally do. And one day, a friend who lives in Miami, who is the only person in Miami who knows Jordan's real name, decided to take the day off, decided not to go to work. And he went to get a cup of coffee in the morning, sit down with the newspaper, and opened up the Miami Herald, which is a newspaper I would not read. I live in Fort Lauderdale, and I wouldn't read the Miami Herald on a normal basis, and especially not during the week. He opened up the paper, started thumbing through it, and said that he was just drawn to go to the death notices. And he went to the death notices, and all of a sudden, almost as if it was telescopic, he honed in on Jordan's name and Jordan's death notice. Now, it would have been appropriate for it to be in the Miami paper because he had lived there most of his married life with his wife, and his current family, close family, lived in that area, and so did his wife, and his friends, and of course all of his compatriots in the Bureau. And it was a very autobiographical death notice. In the death notice, it recounted almost verbatim all of the salient information, personal information that Jordan had told me, including his being working for the Bureau and having been in the Navy, and the other things, children's names. And, when you are an intelligence agent, even a police officer, you never tell a person that you're focusing on as a subject of inquiry anything personal, let alone to tell them the true names of your family members, all of which Jordan did to me. So I would assume from that death notice, in a way it was greatly relieving to me when my friend called me, very reluctantly called me to tell me that he had seen this death notice. And I had him read it. Out of my shock about hearing it, was the relief that everything he had told me was true. The death notice also made a specific point to say that he had recently been transferred to Houston and was working within the Bureau at Houston, et cetera, et cetera. So, then began, I thought, how am I going to deal with this? This is, my first gut feeling, of course, was that he wasn't dead. It just wasn't possible that a man, 34-year-old man, who had 4 children that he loved dearly, would be dead. And it didn't say how he died. Normally, in most death notices, it says if it was an accident, it would say suddenly, or after a long illness or a short illness. Many would give, especially if it was an autobiographical one. But there was no information. It didn't even say anything about internment or funeral services, just a memorial service. Again, for brevity's sake, it seemed like the universe wanted me to know. I tried everything I could on my own normal resources that a person would use to find out more about the death, but even contacting the county records, nobody would tell me anything. There was total closure on it. I contacted the Houston Chronicle. They wrote me a very strange note. I had initially contacted them to find out if there was a death notice, which there wasn't. They said there wasn't any, and then they said, well, I said, is there any kind of other newspaper article or anything about that? And they said, well, if you want any information, you have to send a check to our library, our newspaper library, and we'll see if we have anything with more information. And so I sent them the death notice I had, and then they sent me back my same death notices information. And I said, I wrote them back a letter, a very polite letter saying, could you please check again? Basically, you're sending me information that I have sent you. And then they wrote me a very strange letter, which I have, saying, well, we're sorry if you think that we're hiding anything. We're not. This is all the information we have. And I didn't say anything about them hiding, and why would I think the Houston Chronicle would hide anything? So in general, that just shows you the tenor of the shutdown of information regarding this man. But then, as I said, the universe wants me to know. It seems that things come together for me to get information. I decided to get away, and I went to visit a friend in New York City, and I called another friend who had gone to New York on a vacation, a friend who lives here in Fort Lauderdale, and I told her about Jordan, what I found out, and then she said to me, this is really strange. She said that an old family friend of hers, who she was going to see the next day, told her that her daughter and son-in-law were in town, and they were coming in the next day, and her son-in-law was an FBI agent who just happened to work at the same branch office in South Florida that Jordan used to work at. Incredible synchronicity. And so she said, would you like me to ask my friend to find out from her son-in-law if he knows anything about that? And I said, sure. I said, but just leave me out of the loop. I don't want my name involved. And then she phoned me and said, Jordan committed suicide. That's how he died. That's what the FBI agent told my friend. And he said, sure, I know all about it. We all know about it. That's how he died. So when my friend told me that, I found it even more unbelievable that he died, was that he would have committed suicide. Because it seemed to me when I had spoken to him, he was fairly grounded. The only thing that he said to me that showed any signs of his being off kilter was that he wished that he could get out of this Division 5 within the FBI and go to doing something different because he no longer could tell the good guys from the bad. And there would be no way I could derive from that conversation with him that when, with all his plans for the future, that he would ever take his own life a few short months later. But I still didn't know how it was that he shot himself. A few weeks following my going to New York, quite unexpectedly, I went to Roswell, and a friend said, "Why don't you just set up some of your books here and sell them?" And it was a place where people were doing speaking. It was in the lobby of the main amphitheater. So I set my books up, and people came over and chatting with me and talking. One man said, "Oh, this really looks interesting. I'd like to buy it." So then I said to him, I said, the last chapter of this book was just written in life a few weeks ago. This was July, and Jordan had passed early in June. I said, as a matter of fact, it's just about a month now. So I said, this agent that I speak about in my book is said to have committed suicide. So then this man who was buying the book said to me, "Well, was he a young guy with kids?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "How do you know that?" And he said, "I used to work in that FBI office in Houston as a clerk, and I've just been transferred to New Mexico in the FBI office here." And he said, "And gee, we all know about it. It's been on our office internet." And I said, "You do?" I said, "Well, can you tell me how he died? How did he take his own life?" And he said, "Yeah, they said that he drove his car into the local cemetery in the community in which he lived, the bedroom community outside of Houston, and he killed himself when he was in his car. Apparently, he must have shot himself through the head." And then the man said something very interesting. He said, it's interesting that he died, and he died this way. It's because lately there have been some other young special agents who have also committed suicide just right around the same time." I thought, "Oh, yeah, that is really interesting." So from that point, I got the rest of the picture. Subsequently, with the help of friends, I found out that the memorial service